Good evening. It's evening right now where I am, or good morning or afternoon if you're watching this on replay. Gordon Causey, as it always is. And this is Candy the Wonder Dog jumping all over me. But before I look after her, I just want to start out by saying that what I'm going to be talking about tonight. I'm going to be talking about my transition from being a liberal voter to a conservative voter. And I think, given that we're in an election cycle, that this kind of content might be appreciated by some. But anyone who's tuned into my videos before knows that Candy shows up at the start of every one, and I've been conditioned that I have to give her a treat. And border collies are very smart, smarter than me in a lot of ways. She has trained me. So, sweet. All right, come on up. Get your treat. There we go. Now I get peace. And Danny is here. He's got his coffee. I have my coffee. I wore this shirt on purpose, even knowing it has a hole in it. And the reason I wore it is kind of cover up the hole with my hands is this shirt is probably 25, 30 years old. And it's something of a throwback. It's not a rugby shirt, but it's a rugby style shirt. And to me, rugby, even though it's not a Canadian game, it's very popular in Canada. And back in the 80s, when I was in high school, rugby shirts were de rigueur. If you're my age or in and around my age, and I grew up in the GTA, I spent a lot of years growing up in the GTA. I'll go through a bit of my history, but I grew up 1978 onward in a town called Pickering, Ontario, which is part of the GTA. It's the eastern part of the GTA. And back then, Adidas track pants, Adidas sweatshirts, and Adidas gym bags, which the handles always broke on, were something of a standard uniform. And rugby pants or rugger pants and rugby shirts. I don't know why, but that was kind of the Canadian uniform at the time. And so I decided, even notwithstanding the hole in it, this shirt is old. And Danny, who's a few years younger than myself, I'm not sure exactly how old you are, but you are younger than me, I think, still has his 30 years old. It's amazing. Guys in our clothing, sometimes we like to hang on to things forever. And that certainly, you get a nostalgic feeling. And like I say, I've had this shirt for at least 30 years. It may even be older than that. So just the one small hole, I should at some point stitch it up or do something to it. Don't know how it got there. Anyway, I did vote for Justin Trudeau all the way back in 2015. At the beginning of 2015, I was living in Quebec City, La Ville de Quebec. I was in the army. I was posted to Valcartier. I was in the communications branch of the military, and I'd spent from 2011 to 2015 posted to Valcartier. I had requested that posting. I wanted to go there because prior to moving there, my French was reasonable. I could get by. I could complete a sentence. I had a lot of the time I had trouble understanding Quebecers because they speak very fast. They run their words together, same as English. And so it could be difficult to understand. And so I requested a posting. I spent time with QGET, which is Quartier Général Escadron des Transmissions. In English, that's HQ and SIGs. And then I was posted to a field ambulance unit as a communications guy. And at the beginning of 2015, I think the date was January 28th. I got my posting message that was sending me back to Ontario, where I live now. And so the election had not yet been called. However, the Liberals were gearing up for their 2015 election, and the Journal de Québec announced that the Quebec Liberal Party, or the Federal Liberal Party, they were going to be having an event at a place called L'Hôtel in downtown Quebec City, a hotel called L'Hôtel, a hotel called The Hotel. And Justin Trudeau was going to be speaking, and he was going to be introducing a number of the candidates who had already been nominated in the capital city region. And I read it to my wife, whose French is, she never really picked up the language. But so I translated, read it to her, and she, can we go? Can we go? She was in love with Justin Trudeau, good looking guy. And so I said, sure, it's a public event, open to the public. So we went down, and it was in a ballroom in Quebec City, in a hotel ballroom. Great. We went in. It was a ballroom like you would expect there to be any number of things, like a wedding. And the capacity of the room was probably somewhere in and around 200 people. And so it was well staged, because the one thing about any type of political rally event, especially if it's going to be on TV, is you want to create the atmosphere of a packed house, and it certainly accomplished that. And they had a stage set up, and Trudeau went up and he gave a speech all in French. The only thing I really remembered from it is when he said, j'étais un éducateur, et si j'écrivais sur le bulletin de Stephen Harper, j'écrivais, il jouait pas bien avec les autres. I was a former teacher, and if I was to write, on Stephen Harper's report card, I would say that he doesn't play well with others. Ha ha ha, cute little joke. I don't remember much else of his speech. It was all in French, obviously, Quebec City. I understood it all. And then after and then he had each one of the candidates who had already been nominated came up, and he then went around glad handing, shaking hands, pressing the flesh, kissing babies, the typical politician stuff. And we waited, my wife and my youngest, who at that point was coming up on about a year and a half years of age. My youngest was born when I was 47. I'm 58 now. And so he came up, and we got a picture. It's on my Facebook profile. Gordon Causey, on my main profile, I have two. On my main Gordon Causey profile, there's a picture of my wife and my youngest with Justin Trudeau. And my wife is just like all thrilled to be having her picture with Justin Trudeau. And my young guy just sitting there pretty much oblivious. Trudeau, of course, offered to shake my hand. I declined. To shake his hand. And we only spoke in English because his French far outstrips my own. And, it's kind of a little dance that takes place when you're an Anglophone living in Quebec, is when you conversate with someone, quite often you want to determine whose language skills are better in each person's second language. Would happen to me all the time. I would go into a shopping mall. I would go into the Galerie de Capitale, big shopping mall there, and I'd go into like a Best Buy. I wanted to buy some earphones or something. And the guy serving me, when he detected my English accent, started speaking to me in English, and I started to speak back to him in French. And it's a little battle to see who's going to win. And typically, whichever one works best between the two of you, that's the one you default to. And a lot of Quebecers are very anxious to improve their English. And in Quebec City, they don't often meet Anglophones. So when they meet one, hey, here's a chance for me to work on my English. That's a bit of a side story. So with Trudeau, we were speaking English. He offered shake my hand, or he put out his hand. I said, I'm going to decline shaking your hand, but don't be offended. I said, in 1978 or 79, I said, your father was at a campaign rally in Whitby, Ontario, and I was in attendance there. I shook his hand, and he lost that election. And Trudeau laughed and he said, I'm not superstitious, but I'll respect your wishes. And the only other thing I said to him at the time was, I said, you're a far better public speaker in French than you are in English. And he said, I've been told that before. And I said, in English, you far too much, you're far too hesitant in English. And he said, you're not the first one to mention it. End of story. And that was the end of our interaction. Uh, at any rate, so I did vote for Justin Trudeau. Why? Why did I vote for Justin Trudeau? Well, for one, I was tired of Harper. I thought he'd run the course, so to speak. And there was the F-35 scandal that they couldn't seem to get the fighter jets that we still haven't acquired. But the cost overruns, and there seemed to be no end to this never-ending saga of how much were the F-35s going to be costing us. And there were all kinds of, I can't remember exactly the reporting on it. There was also Harper had a very wooden personality. He never really connected with people. And I figured it was time for a change, but it wasn't hard for me to vote Liberal because I'd been, from a very early age, always tended to vote Liberal, predominantly. Not always. There were moments, there were times when I had switched to the Conservatives. Jean Chrétien, I had voted for him the first time he ran for election, but then after he failed to deliver on his promise to get rid of the GST, Jean Chrétien gone across the country, he'd done rallies all over the place. He told Canadians as soon as he got elected, we were going to axe the GST. It was a major plank in his spoken platform. Sheila Copps, who would become his deputy PM, she actually went so far and said, I will resign if we don't get rid of the GST. And so it seemed to me a slam dunk that he was going to. And of course, then he backpedaled and said, well, it actually wasn't in our little red book of promises. So fooled you, just kidding. And I'm in subsequent elections after when Chrétien ran for re-election twice, I switched to the Conservative Party. But before that, the only time I'd ever voted Conservative prior to that was in a provincial election, and that was during the Mike Harris era. After he won his first election, I hadn't voted for him, but when Mike Harris ran for re-election the second time, I did vote for him. And I even helped out on the campaign of a local MPP, member of provincial parliament. And so my leanings were always strongly toward Liberal and even NDP. And I came to around to voting for the Conservatives only a few times. Now, why did I turn on Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party? I'm talking about someone myself, born in 1966, born in a little town called Port Colborne, Ontario. My family, we lived in a place called Ridgeway, Ontario, which is near Crystal Beach. Ridgeway, you're probably going to have trouble finding it on a map. It's a dot, and there's no hospital. That's why I was born in Port Colborne, near Crystal Beach, Welland County, Ontario. But when I was less than 6 months old, my father worked in the finance industry, worked for one of the big Canadian banks, and he got transferred down to New York City. And we moved to New York and lived in a place called Staten Island, one of the boroughs. You got Manhattan, Queens, Long Island. Staten Island is one of the boroughs of New York. And we lived there for about 3 years. And then my dad got transferred back to Canada, and we lived in Etobicoke for a few months, and they wanted him back in New York. And make a long story short, eventually he agreed to go when they paid him enough money, because he didn't want to live in Staten Island again, and it's very expensive, New York. And he was able to make enough money that we were able to live in New Jersey, northern New Jersey, the nice part of New Jersey. We lived in a place called Bergen County in a town called Glen Rock. I went to kindergarten grades 1, 2, 3, 4. So I am Canadian, but now at the age of 9, when we moved from New Jersey back to Canada, I had very American sensibilities about me. And my mom hated living in the United States. She very much wanted to be back in Canada. In 1967, Canada's centennial year. In the centennial year, 1967, we lived in New York City. When the Canadian hockey team beat the Russians in the famous Summit Series, we were living in New Jersey. When Trudeau mania broke out in 1968, we were living in New York. And my mom, very much a political junkie. She was the political junkie in the family. And she experienced Trudeau mania from afar. And we missed every election. We came back to Canada when I was finishing grade 4 and then all of grade 5, but there wasn't an election at that time. That would have been 1975, 1976, that area. And then in 1977, we moved to Portland, Oregon. And I lived there for a full year. I did all of grade 6. We were there from June of 77 till June of 78. And then as I was turning 12, we moved back to Canada permanently to stay. My dad left the bank and he got a job in Toronto, and we settled in Pickering. And I was there for many years until I got an apartment in downtown Toronto. And my mom was a political junkie. And finally, she was in Canada during an election. It was 1978 or 1979. And Trudeau's Liberals were running for re-election against Joe Clark's Conservatives. And I was signed up to campaign. My mom got me into the office. I was stuffing envelopes. And at one point, they even had me making phone calls. Gordon Causey calling on behalf of Norm Catholic, the Liberal candidate in the riding, just wondering if we can count on your support in the coming election. And you want to identify your support ahead of an election so that on voting day, you can see whether or not they voted. And if you see that they haven't, then you can get on the phone with them and say, hey, Bob, notice you hadn't gotten out to vote yet. Is everything okay? Do you need a lift? Do you need a babysitter? Is there something we can do to help you out? And all campaigns do this, Liberal, Conservative, NDP, all of them, if they're able, if they have enough volunteers. I'm going to take a little break and read what Danny's writing. Oh, great. Danny has put me on his television. Lovely. Anyway, Danny says on Justin's report card, no one wants to play with him. He's selfish, sneaky, and for some reason loves blackface. At this point, in 2015, when I voted for him, I don't think the blackface stuff had really come out, or if it had, it was one of him as a teenager. And I was willing to give the guy a pass because I was like, well, you know what? We all do stupid stuff when you're a teenager. When I was a teenager, I mooned half the student body in at my high school. So, we all do stupid things. Of course, later we found out that and Trudeau then lied about it and said, I only did it the one time. And I was willing to say, hey, fair enough. You only did it once. We all do stupid things. Then, of course, we found out he lied, and that he later admitted that he didn't know how many times he'd done it. He'd done it because more evidence came out of him doing it. There was one video, one picture, and then that yearbook spread of him doing the Knights of Arabia, and he went full Monty, blacking up his hands, both sides, and with that creepy picture of his around a student's female students over her shoulder. Not a good look. But more problematic than anything else is the fact that he lied about it and said it was only the one time, when he actually had done it so many times he couldn't put a number on it. But it reminded me when that came out, and people say I was willing to be apologetic for the guy, and I said, you know what? It's like when Stephen Harper, there was something called Wafergate, where Stephen Harper had gone to a Roman Catholic mass, and in every Roman Catholic church service mass, they have communion, and that actually, I think that is the mass, is when they say, "The Lord be with you, and also with you. We lift up our hearts. We lift them up to the Lord," and then everyone comes up and receives the host. However, you're not supposed to, according to Roman Catholicism and their rules, you're not to receive Holy Roman Communion unless you're a confirmed member of the Catholic Church. And Stephen Harper is a member of the Missionary Alliance Church. And yeah, maybe he should have known, but who really cares? I mean, this is the problem with politics in today's world, is the partisan types. Any port in a storm, any port in a storm, anything that will give them grounds to, oh, that guy. Yeah, and you see the hypocrisy all the time in the political game. The conservative will do something, and liberals will say, "Look," and then a liberal will do the same thing, and they'll say, "Well, no, it's different now." When there are conflicts of interest, like Justin Trudeau's Liberals were awarding untendered contracts to this We charity. And it was revealed that this We charity was paying large, I think it was 6-figure speaking fees to his mother and brother. And that's obviously does not pass the smell test. So um, I only voted for Trudeau the one time. And the reason I turned on Trudeau is because part of his campaign back in 2015 was that he was going to run small deficits for the first 2-3 years and then restore the budget to balance by the end of his 4-year term. Small deficits, 10, 12, 15 billion a year, but then going down and restoring balance. And I actually campaigned for Kim Rudd. She was the Liberal candidate in the riding where I reside now, which is called Northumberland Clark, but in 2015 it was called Northumberland Peterborough South, and I campaigned for her. And I remember during the 2016 presidential election, she hosted a watch party in Port Hope or Coburg, I forget which, because Brighton, my town's really small. Coburg and Port Hope are much bigger. And in one of those, a local pub, she hosted a watch party to watch the results of the 2016 election. And I went to that watch party with my wife. And I asked her pointedly, "Are you still planning to restore the budget to balance by the end of the term?" "Oh, absolutely, we're committed." And she was there with a member of the finance committee who was an MP for a riding in Quebec, and he likewise affirmed that, "Oh yes, we're going to have a balanced budget by 2019. By the time the next election comes around, we'll have a balanced budget." And there was no reason for him not to have a balanced budget, given the fact that they had legalized weed, marijuana, and had huge new revenue streams coming in. And yet they still couldn't manage to do it. And that's when I said, "Sorry, liberals, you pushed me away again." Chrétien pushed me away when he broke his promise to cancel the GST. I told you it was, I've got a memory about me, but please verify anything I say. And if I get anything wrong, put it in the comment field, but I'm pretty damn confident that I've got my facts straight. So Sheila Copps had promised that if they didn't repeal the GST, that she was going to resign her seat. And then within 6 months to a year, when they'd made it clear that they were not going to repeal the GST, there were calls for Sheila Copps to fulfill her campaign pledge and to resign her seat. And she pushed back against it, but eventually she gave in and she did resign her seat, which resulted in a by-election in Hamilton, which is where she's from. Copps Coliseum. Her father, I believe, was the mayor, a very popular mayor of Hamilton. And the hockey arena they built there, Copps Coliseum, is named after him. So she did resign. But then, once the by-election was called, she ran again. And 200-300, I don't know how much a by-election cost back then, but just a needless wasted expense. If she was she should have just not even bothered. And I actually remember very well the front page of the Toronto Sun newspaper, and it showed a bunch of people walking around, and they had Copps Coliseum in the back, and like let you know that these are people walking down the street in Hamilton, and two guys are walking around looking at all these people, and their face is a rear end, two cheeks and the crack down the middle, and that's everyone's head. And the one said to the other, wow, the people or the voters in Hamilton East really are different. It was an Andy Donato cartoon. It was very, very good. I went to university with his son. Anyway, I met him while at university. I can't remember if he was attending or if it was a speaking engagement. I'm a very political guy. When I was in university, Sheila Copps, and this was still during the Mulroney era when I was in university. And Sheila Copps came and was doing a book signing. She'd written a book called Nobody's Baby, because at one point when she was in opposition and part of what they called the Rat Pack, there were three Liberal MPs, Sheila Copps, Nunziata, and a third guy whose name escapes me now, who were considered the Rat Pack, and they were the ones holding Mulroney's feet to the fire, much the same way that Pierre Poilievre has been holding Trudeau's feet to the fire, and now Mark Carney's. And I went and I bought a copy of her book for my mom, my political junkie mother. And the reason she gave the title Nobody's Baby is because the finance minister under not the finance minister, a member of Brian Mulroney's cabinet was John Crosbie. And during question period, she had stood up to attack him. And he stood up and said, "Oh, calm down, baby." And she was right, nobody's baby. So let me read what Danny's writing before I get going. He also wrote, "I was expelled from private boarding school in Montreal for giving him a classic ass whooping." July 16, 2010, Prime Minister Stephen Harper's Conservative intended to procure 65 F-35s to replace the existing C-18 Hornets for $9 billion, $16 billion with ancillary costs, but that just kept going up and up, and it didn't. And the Auditor General was chiming in, and there were all kinds of questions about it, and it wasn't a good look. And then Danny's asking me, considering how tight the race is a vote for Bloc, a vote for Carney? I think it depends on the race that you're in. I know that Danny is in Montreal, and in Montreal, depending on the riding, there are ridings where the Bloc Québécois has a better chance of defeating the Liberal than the Conservatives did. And so I don't think it would be necessarily a wasted vote to vote for the Bloc Québécois if you're voting strategically with a mindset of ABC, anybody but Carney. If you're an ABC, anybody but Carney voter in Quebec, and the Bloc Québécois has the best chance to win, then I wouldn't begrudge anyone for voting strategically to keep the Liberals from winning to keep them winning as few seats as possible, whether in Quebec or anywhere else. Um, and Eatme's writing that the Bloc doesn't want pipelines, screw Blanchette. Yeah, the Bloc and the Liberals both are anti-pipeline. There's a bill called Bill C-69, and it sounds like it's a bill that is favorable to natural resource infrastructure type projects like pipelines, but the devil is always in the details. And what the legislation claims is that they want to take phase one of the review process and for it to be completed with 180 days, so about 6 months. However, since that legislation has been enacted, not one single project has gotten through phase one, and some of them are already over 300 days. And it's, the devil is in the details. It's, the bill is designed to make things so slow, murderously onerous on developers that they just give up. And because, how many millions of dollars are you willing to invest in a pipeline project that first has to go through regulatory approval that is nigh on impossible to get? And you got to pay consultants, you got to pay lawyers, you got to pay lobbyists, and you're trying to get it through, and eventually it comes up no, and you've spent 10, 20, 30 million dollars all to get a no. And this country needs pipelines. This country needs to develop its energy. There's so much wealth that we're leaving in the ground, which is going to get me on to another point. But before I do, I'm going to read this. In total, Craig Kleiberger confirmed at a parliamentary committee that the Weed Cherry paid approximately $425,000 to Trudeau's family, including expenses. Oh, it's insane. And then there was the Aga Khan. Trudeau accepted gifts from the Aga Khan. Got to go to I think the Aga Khan has a private island somewhere. Remind you of anyone? And Trudeau went down, took helicopter trips, all paid for by the Aga Khan, and people are saying, "Oh, big deal." So, the problem is the Aga Khan. He's since passed away, but he has a charity that receives large funding from the Canadian government. And he was slapped on the wrist by the ethics commissioner. He interfered in a criminal trial, got slapped on the wrist by the ethics commissioner. He mocked Native Canadians during a Laurier Club event where the Grassy Narrows Reserve in northern Ontario, up north of Thunder Bay, has mercury poisoning on its land. And Trudeau in 2015 committed to cleaning it up. He made a campaign promise, going to clean up this land. We're going to look after you. And then after he got elected, he forgot it. Like he forgot about, we're going to end first past the post voting. He forgot about it, like he forgot about, balancing the budget. And he forgot about cleaning up the mercury tainted ground that was tainted from mercury from a now defunct pulp and paper mill. And people are, getting sick and dying in this reserve. And 4 years after making that promise, he had done nothing nothing had been done to do anything to help the people of that reserve. And so 2 members of that reserve paid $1,500 to crash so that they could attend what they call the Laurier Club. This is called pay for access. You want to talk to the prime minister, to senior members of his cabinet? Well, pay $1,500, go to the Laurier Club, and you can do it. And so they paid $1,500. And then Trudeau, when he got up to speak, a woman unrolled, a native woman from the reserve, unrolled a poster. Can't see what it says because the video we have of it, it was only video, was cell phone video coverage. And she held up this poster and she started to challenge Trudeau. Why haven't you fulfilled your commitment to the people of the Grassy Narrows Reserve and cleaned up the mercury tainted soil you promised us? And then immediately she was manhandled by two or three security guys. Not saying they were rough with her, but they took her and they forcibly removed her from the room as she was yelling out, "You committed, you committed." And Trudeau, the slime ball, had the unmitigated gall to mock her. And he said, "Thank you for your donation." Oh, man, to do that. Someone has spent $1,500. Well, it was actually 3,000. Her and a gentleman from the reserve had done that, had gone down. They'd spent $3,000 in order to have access to Trudeau, to be able to confront him, because you can't do it otherwise. And so they somewhat crashed, although legally they paid their money so that they would be able to confront Trudeau. And then he mocked her. "Thanks for your donation, you dumb, stupid Indian." I mean, that's the subtext to what Trudeau was saying. So I'm done with the Trudeau-led Liberal Party at that point. Completely done with the Trudeau-led Liberal Party. Now, granted, in 2020, he did bring in a big-time advisor. Guess who he brought on as his chief top economic advisor? Bum, 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 bum. Mark Carney. Mark Carney came in as the top economic advisor to the Trudeau Liberals. Hopped on jets, went to places like China, met with their finance guys. He was there as an advisor, getting to travel to China on the public dime, meeting with senior Communist Party officials. Fair enough. But then he takes a little side trip to the Bank of China and he arranges a $250+ million loan, more than $250 million loan from the Bank of China. For Canada? No, for Brookfield. For Brookfield, where he's chairman of the board. I'm old. I don't say the chair. Doesn't sound right. If it's a woman, I'll say chairwoman. If it's a man, I'll say chairman. There's another thing that may cause me to leave the Liberals is this woke liberal mindset has jumped the shark to the point where if you are opposed to drag queens reading stories to kids dressed in lingerie, men wearing women's lingerie, but the liberal mindset has gone so off the rails that that's okay, because if you don't go along with it, we're going to call you names. You're a transphobe. So, and it's not phobia. Phobia is an irrational fear of something. I'm not irrationally afraid of drag queens or people who are confused about their gender, because gender confusion is as old as history itself. It's always been there. There have always been men who have thought that they should have been born women, and there have always been women who thought they should have been born men. That's always existed. What's new in our world is that now, for guys like Mark Carney and Justin Trudeau, drag queen storytime hour at United Churches in my own area, sexualizing children, criminal, absolutely criminal. Liberals have jumped the shark. I have said before, though, that I'm not anathema to voting Liberal again. As a matter of fact, if Jody Wilson-Raybould was the leader of the Liberal Party, there's a very good chance she would get my vote. The Liberals would get my vote if Jody Wilson-Raybould were leading that party, because I respect that woman's integrity. She was, during Trudeau's first mandate, 2015, he named her as this nation's very first Indigenous First Nations Attorney General, the top lawyer for the government. And, Mr. Inclusive, 50-50, it's 2015. Fair enough. And he named Jody Wilson-Raybould as the Attorney General. And her office was taking action against SNC-Lavalin, a major engineering firm based in Montreal. And SNC-Lavalin is a big-time donor to the Liberals. They also donate to the Conservatives. They're a big-time political player. They know how to lobby. They know how to grease politicians' hands. And so Trudeau and his office intervened and tried to strong-arm Jody Wilson-Raybould into giving them a plea bargain. They called it a deferred prosecutorial agreement, meaning that, here, sign this, no admission of guilt, you promise never to do it again, and you pay a fine and everything is forgotten. It's a plea bargain, deferred prosecutorial agreement. I've seen these things before in legal reporting. Basically, what happens is when they go through, the party that is accepting the deferred prosecutorial agreement pays the fine. They agree never to do what they never admit to having done in the first place. It's crazy. We'll never do that again, even though we never admitted that we did it in the first place. We won't engage in that type of behavior. And the behavior they were engaged in is that to win contracts in Libya, they had been found, and they were actually found guilty of bribing government officials in Libya, which is something that contravenes Canadian law. And Jody Wilson-Raybould's office, they were pursuing action against SNC-Lavalin. And Justin Trudeau and his office tried to intervene and tried to strong-arm Jody Wilson-Raybould, and she had the guts to say, no, we're going ahead with this. I'm the top. I'm the top lawyer for the government. It's my decision. And then Trudeau fired her, kicked her out of caucus. She ran in the 2019 election in the somewhere in British Columbia. I forget exactly what riding she is, but she won re-election as an independent because the Liberal Party, they shut her out. That's the Liberal Party. That's the inclusive Liberal Party. It's inclusive it's a thin veneer. It's a very thin veneer. And so that, there are so many reasons. And as I say, Mark Carney, starting in 2020, became Trudeau's top economic advisor as we watched our economy falling off a cliff. Now, one of the questions that may come up, I'm just going to read what I have before I get onto this next segment. I'm just going to read what Danny's writing. He's writing, Justin Trudeau is classless. No argument from me. And Sheriff is saying, thank God you are saving yourself 6 years now since 2019 when it was obvious the leftists were woke AF. I know what AF is, but I'm not saying it. Yeah, it's been 6 years since 2019. 2015, I don't remember there being, now I've been living in Quebec City from 2011 to 2015 and in the army and, and consuming for the most part French language media. And I don't think do you have Z and Zer in French? I know they do have a word, IL, instead of il or L. They say EL, but I've never ever heard anyone use them. Danny's saying, evening sheriff. Eat Me says, hey, had an uncle Daniel that became anti-Danielle way back then. Not transphobic, but drag queens belong in a cabaret for 18 plus. Hey, if you're an adult, fine. This idea that it is care to perform mutilating surgeries on children, mutilating healthy tissues. I'm talking about double mastectomies and castration. That is Joseph Mengele level evil. And there are all kinds of stories coming out now because this hasn't been going on that long of individuals, often women, who regret it, who have come out and now they regret their decision. How many of them? Now, those are the ones we know of. Those are the ones who are willing to go public. How many are suffering in silence because they hacked off their, perfectly healthy breast tissue when they were a child and were prescribed things like puberty blockers, which have proven harms, proven dangerous side effects. Imagine a child taking a drug that is going to reduce bone density, subjecting them to something akin to osteoporosis, which is a disease that used to be for old women. And that's what happens with kids who take puberty blockers. Look up the side effects on these drugs. A child has a mental health issue. They're confused. They think they should have been born the other gender, and there are only two, male and female. And so now, rather than helping them understand, just play Mr. Fred Rogers' old song. Everybody's fancy, everybody's fine. Your body's fancy, and so is mine. And instead, oh no, we ka-ching, ka-ching, have some puberty blockers. Ka-ching, ka-ching. Here, we're going to do radical mutilating surgery on healthy tissue. Ka-ching, ka-ching. Follow the money. It's disgusting. And Danny's writing indoctrinating kids. And as far as French pronouns goes, he says, I don't know and don't care. Okay, he's writing something that I'm not going to repeat, but I will never advocate violence on anyone. I'm a Christian, and violence is never the answer to anything. Now I forgot. Oh yes, the big issue of the day for a lot of people. Climate change is a big deal. Environmentalism is a big deal. I divorce those two. There's environmentalism, and then there's climate change. They're two separate issues. Everybody that I know wants clean air, clean soil, clean water. Who doesn't? And that's why we have environmental assessments and environmental impact studies, et cetera, et cetera. The thing is, we live in a very hyper-competitive world. And we live in a country that absolutely 100% requires fossil fuels. Could we switch to all electrical? Could everyone drive an electric car? Well, we better probably, I don't know how much capacity would have to be added to our electricity grid to charge. I don't know how many cars there are in this country, but there are plenty of studies out there saying that the grid just simply could not handle it. But Cryptomeria has shown up and is writing that it costs almost $60,000 per transition. I know a guy in the Army who used to be Guy and used to be Bob and is now Wilhelmina. not the real names, and paid for by your tax dollars, my tax dollars, our tax dollars. We haven't got enough money in this country to properly, look after our elderly, our seniors, our vulnerable, but we got money to transition soldiers. Give me a break. Anyway, I differentiate between the climate and the environment. They're linked, but they're not. And this is the main breakaway point for me. Canada is a nation of we are a nation of just 40 million people. China, by contrast, is a nation of 1.4 billion plus. They're basically 35 times our size in terms of population. And land mass, we're about the same, but they've got, I think they're I think Russia's the world's largest country. China, I think, is Canada's number 2, China's number 3, but we're basically the same size as China. The difference is negligible, but they have 35 times our population. And they keep adding more and more coal-fired hydroelectric generation. So while we're impoverishing ourselves, they're bringing on cheap coal-fired hydro generation to fuel their booming economy. We freeze in the dark. They get to get rich off cheap, horribly polluting energy, coal. Coal, you want to read about coal, read Charles Dickens' book, Hard Times, where, there's a coal plant where they're burning coal into the atmosphere, and it's just a constant cloud over the sky. That's what they do in China. That's what they do in India. And Canada, we have LNG, liquefied natural gas, sitting in the ground that can't get to market because there are no pipelines, and it's impossible to get pipelines built because of the Liberal bill C-69, which Carney refuses. If he gets reelected, he's refused to repeal it. He said, no, we're keeping Bill C-69 because it sucks and blows at the same time. It talks about, speeding up natural resource development while putting rules in place that make it impossible to do so. That's basically what Bill C-69 is designed to do. It's designed to look good. It's designed to sound like it's going to speed up, but the actual nuts and bolts of it, the devil in the details, is that it makes getting a natural resource project off the ground basically impossible. And that's what liberals are all about, unfortunately, in the year 2025, is about saying one thing, doing another. Mark Carney talks about openness and transparency, and yet he refuses to disclose to Canadians what his financial assets are. When he proposes spending $1 billion on prefabricated modular homes, these mini homes, well, how much do you have does Brookfield, your former employer, how much stock do they have in companies that produce prefabricated modular mini homes? Reporting is that Brookfield invested something like $1 billion in companies that produce these mini homes. And now we got Carney saying, oh, Canada, we're going to spend big on mini homes. Well, are you going to benefit from that? And can we see your assets? Every federal leader, every member of parliament is required to disclose their finances so that we know. But Carney refuses. And technically, he doesn't have to. And the reason he doesn't have to is, one, he doesn't have a seat in parliament. And two, once he became leader of the Federal Liberal Party and the prime minister, he has 60 days to disclose it to the ethics commissioner. And then the ethics commissioner doesn't reveal it to Canadians for another 60 days on top of that. So we get to see Mark Carney's the financial disclosure, but not until well after the election, after we've already decided. There are so many problems with this guy. Now, I should talk about Pierre Poilievre because it's a binary choice. The next Prime Minister of Canada will either be Mark Carney or will be Pierre Poilievre. And Poilievre has all the warmth. He's the leader of His Majesty's official opposition. Got to get used to saying his instead of her. He's the leader of the official opposition. It's his job to hold the government's feet to the fire. There are videos out there of him during parliamentary finance committee hearings, grilling guys like Mark Carney and others. And he's a pit bull. He is a pit bull. He has all the warmth of a pit bull. I noticed that he's endeavoring to soften up his image because the simple fact of the matter is that Canadians care a lot about image. As a matter of fact, I think there are a lot of Canadians who care more about image than substance. Well, it's got to sound, well, he doesn't sound nice. I just don't like him. He doesn't sound nice. He's not friendly. He was very mean to Mark Carney. He's very mean to him about investing in those overseas pipelines while, advocating to keep Canadian energy in the ground. But he was so mean in the way he did it. And, it's this case of facts over feelings is my take, but others, it's feelings over facts. The best prime minister for this country, I'm convinced, provided and I'm willing to say that Pierre Poilievre has promised that he will not bring in a carbon tax, that there will be no tax, there will be no carbon pricing, and that he's not going to drive inflation the way the Liberals did with their carbon taxation. He better stick to that promise. He has likewise promised to work with the provinces and the municipalities to cut the red tape that keeps so many projects right now in Canada. If you want to build a house, the building costs are dwarfed by the regulatory costs, by all the permitting that is required to go through to get the house built. It adds so much cost to housing and any other development project. And he's promising to cut that, but he's got to deliver on that which he is promising. He's promising to end what they call safe, quote unquote, injection sites, and in favor of treatment, so that people, rather than giving them access to a destructive drug, that pay for treatment instead to get people off drugs like fentanyl or meth or whatever the case may be. Well, he's got to follow through. And if he doesn't, bye-bye my support. Anyway. Danny's writing that from 1985 to 2000 was the best decade and a half ever. Was a good time. And then Cryptomeria about the $60K per transition. And we have a public health care system. Yeah. Unbelievable what we can find money for. And we look, and likewise, Pierre Poilievre has promised to cut back on foreign aid. And so much what we hear of the foreign aid that's going out, it's going to third world countries to advance LGBTQ type projects. It's one thing if we're sending them weed or flour or products that will actually help people, put food on the table. But instead, we're funding theatrical productions to empower transgender youth. It's ideological. And that's just wrong. Eat Me thinks 83 and 84 was epic. Max Power is here and is reminding everyone to click the like button. Thank you for that. And Danny's saying that in terms of size, the US is third. While I'm wrapping up, I'm going to look it up. World's largest countries by size. Now, according to AI, because I can't avoid it, Russia's number one. I got that right. Canada was number two. And the United States is third. Yeah, you're right. And China is four. However, when you look at Russia is 17,000 square kilometers, 17,000, or yeah, 17,098. Am I expressing this right? 17,098,242. Got it right there. 17,098,242. That's Russia. Canada, we're 9.8 million. The United States, 9.8 million. And China, 9.6 million square kilometers. So we're, Canada, the US, and China, we're all very close in size. And the simple fact of the matter is that no matter what we do, even if carbon is the big bad boogeyman that everyone claims it is, our contribution is a drop in the bucket. And you also have to be aware and check this out. Don't take my word for it. There are more trees in the Northern Hemisphere than there were 100 years ago. Our hemisphere has more trees in it now than there were 100 years ago. And the reason for that is simple. 100 years ago and more, we were burning wood. Now we're burning cleaner fuels like natural gas. But Mark Carney, through Brookfield, invested in coal. So he doesn't want our wonderful LNG, liquefied natural gas. We got countries like Japan and Korea saying, sell us your LNG. And we can't, because we can't get it to port. We can't get it to so-called tide water, because we can't get any pipelines built, because we've got Bill C-69, which talks about building pipelines, but makes it impossible to do so with the regulations. Max is saying that Carney won't fire the staffers who did it. They're reassigned. Oh, you must be talking about the fact that Liberal Party hacks have been reassigned after they were found to be at a Conservative Party function in Ottawa. They were dropping around buttons they had made up, probably paid for out of the Liberal Party, their taxpayer funded campaign fund. Everyone who donates to a political party in Canada, you get I think it's a 75% tax deduction on the money you contribute. And so this is taxpayer supported if they used, Liberal Party donation funds. And Stop the Steal, lock Justin up, very Republican Trump sounding slogans, because they're having trouble associating Donald Trump with Pierre Poilievre. Canadians are waking up to the fact that, wait a minute, come on. Pierre Poilievre is nothing like Donald J. Trump. Trump's been married twice, three times. I don't know how many. He's got wives he's been, Stormy Daniels and all these scandals. And Pierre Poilievre is squeaky clean. It's got nothing, if anyone is like Donald Trump, it's more Mark Carney. Mark's the one who doesn't want to disclose his finances the same way that Donald Trump didn't want to disclose his tax returns. Mark's, it's liberals calling Poilievre Skippy Pierre. They call him Skippy Pierre. That's name calling like Trump does. Crooked Hillary, Sleepy Joe, Skippy Pierre. Trump wanted to keep all his, disclosures private because, they said, you're not paying any taxes. You're not paying taxes. He goes, that's because I'm smart. I'm playing by the rules. Mark Carney, why won't you show us your stock holdings, and why are you registering funds down in Bermuda at a bike shop to avoid taxes like Trump. Well, I'm playing by the rules. Same rhetoric. And so they're losing, the momentum has shifted. I should have mentioned this earlier, but it shifted. In the last week, Liberal support has started to go down. Conservative support has started to climb. Momentum has shifted for the moment, and I hope it continues, away from the Liberals toward the Conservative. Angus Reid, Nanos, and Ipsos, three of Canada's major polling firms, have all reported the same thing within the last 4 or 5 days, going back to Thursday, Friday last week, that Liberal support has peaked and is now coming down, and Conservative support is climbing. And there is a herd mentality among some voters to go with the flow, and momentum is huge. And Poilievre, by all accounts, is attracting huge, massive rallies, while Mark Carney keeps, I got to go away now. I got to get away from the campaign trail. Things aren't going well. Mark Carney keeps playing cash, running away and hiding. And Poilievre is cramming them in, and the CBC does a hit job. The Edmonton rally, I don't know how many people were there. It's widely reported that it was somewhere between 10 and 15,000. But the CBC, who wasn't at the rally, said they took different pictures that were posted online and then had an expert guesstimate how many people were there. And they said it was difficult because they didn't have a full panoramic picture. So they kind of had to piece it together. Well, why don't you get $1 billion+ from Canadian taxpayers? Why don't you send a damn reporter there, get the proper evidence, and then put it forward in a compelling fashion? Not, it comes across as a hit piece. Makes sense because the Conservative, or rather the Liberal Party of Canada, Carney's saying, I'm going to give you another 100 million. And Pierre Poilievre is talking about cutting the CBC. And that, we don't need the CBC anymore. The CBC, not to the degree that it exists, it doesn't need to be the dominant player in our media sphere. And it was created back in the 1930s when it was needed. The CBC was needed back in the 1930s. It's not needed anymore in the year 2025. We're big enough now. We've got the internet. We have lots of avenues. Anyway, I've gone on way too long. Yeah. The purpose of this video, ultimately, I was hoping, and I am hopeful, that some liberal-minded people will come on and say, okay, why should I? There are people who have misgivings about Mark Carney, and for very legitimate reasons. He's been caught lying about the 2009 recession. He says, because I was, when I was governor of the Bank of Canada, we didn't have a recession. Well, the Americans did. And then you watch the video of him as, governor of the Bank of Canada, announcing to the Parliamentary Finance Committee that, yes, Canada is now in recession. Well, what is it, Mark? Were you lying then, or are you lying now? Or do you just lie all the time? He lied and said that he had nothing to do with Brookfield moving its office from Toronto to New York City. Well, that was done after I left, he said. I guess he didn't know. It's like Trudeau and his blackface. There's a letter out there, Mark, that's widely available. Even the CBC hasn't been able to ignore it. You sent a letter to the shareholders urging them to approve your decision that you had put, your board was recommending. Mark Carney was saying, let's move these high-paying Canadian jobs down to Donald Trump's old neighborhood of New York City. Please. This is the best move for us. And he lied. He said, well, that was done after I left. No, the letter urging shareholders to vote in favor of your move to New York City. You signed it. That was your move, but he lies. So anyway, and I'm going to end it off. Max Powers writing, Carney is pretending to work on tariffs and pausing his campaign, but he's actually doing French lessons in preparation for tomorrow. I will give Carney this. What little I have seen of him en français, he's not bad. He is not bad. He handles himself well. I'm going to give the devil his due. I'm waiting to see the actual Tout le monde en parle. That's a very popular Quebec current affairs show where they've had Jagmeet Singh on before. And you notice I say Jagmeet Singh because that's the man's name. It's not Jagmeet. It's not the way it's pronounced. It's pronounced Jagmeet. You don't have to like Mr. Singh, but if you're going to pronounce his first name, at least do it in the manner it's his name. And if he says his name is Jagmeet, respect. Basic human decency. I've spoken of this before. You don't intentionally mispronounce someone's name. Fair enough. If you don't know that it's Jagmeet and you just read it, it looks like Jagmeet. But he's been out there often enough, and I see too many conservative political voices intentionally pronouncing it Jagmeet when they know it's Jugmeat. And that is disrespectful. So come on, conservatives, you can do better. Okay. It's not gonna I'm not gonna vote liberal because they can't pronounce, or NDP because someone mispronounces or intentionally says a name wrong, but come on. Be better than that. Don't go appeal to the lowest common denominator. That's, Trudeau. If someone doesn't get the vaccine, they're misogynist, they're racist, they're, this and that name calling. Really? And this is, and now we've got Mark Carney has weighed in on social media and saying that there needs to be more restrictions on things like X and Facebook and what have you. We need Big Brother watching us more. No, we do not. Not in a free and democratic, not in a liberal democracy, not in a classical liberal democracy. No. So anyway, Danny has put up words that are very important to me. Jesus is king. I've touched on my faith very briefly, but I like to end my videos with a blessing. I know that not everyone shares my Christian faith. We're in Holy Week right now. We're coming up to the Passover. That's what I prefer to call the Easter season, because as a Christian, I believe that Jesus, when he went to the cross, when he conquered death, when he rose on the third day, that death passed over. It passed over him, and if by acknowledging Jesus Christ as Lord, recognizing that he went to the cross for my sins, death too will pass me over. And I'm talking about the second death, but this is not this video that I'm doing right now was not meant to be overly religious, but the blessing I like to give is at the end, because I do believe there is a creator. I do not believe that we are matter in I do not believe that we are the result of time plus matter plus luck, and I don't believe we're just random matter in motion with no purpose, no meaning. I do believe that there is a creator. I do believe there is a purpose, and the blessing I like to end my videos with comes from the book of Numbers. And it's a blessing that Aaron spoke over God's covenant chosen people. And the words are these: may the Lord bless and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you. And may the Lord grant you peace. At the end of the day, my crystal ball is cracked. Will Mark Carney win? Will Pierre Poilievre win? I don't know. I may come out with a video with a prediction. Right now, I think it's razor thin. If I was forced to make a prediction, I think the Liberals are going to come out on top in a minority situation. But there's about 2 weeks to go. What are we, the 15th, 28th, 13 days until the vote. So vote early if you can. And I'll make a suggestion if you're like-minded with me and a conservative, at least in this election, get someone out with you. Hate somebody. Talk to someone. Talk to someone if they say they're not, I'm not going to bother. Come on, I'll take you to the polling station. You want to vote for and name your local conservative candidate. In my case, it's Philip Lawrence. Vote for Philip Lawrence. And here's why. Mark Carney won't disclose his finances. He registers investment funds down in Bermuda at a bike shop to avoid Canadian taxation. He's chummy with, he's in pictures chummy with Ghislaine Maxwell, who's in jail now because her and her boyfriend, Jeffrey Epstein, were recruiting children to go down to a pedophilic little rape island. I can't stand the guy. Come on, help me out. Just get one. If you can bring one. If every conservative who's voting conservative brings just one person, just one, this election's over. But you got to be willing to do that. Do you care enough? So I'll leave it there. An hour and 16, way too long. Thank you for watching. Comments welcome. And if I get some good questions, I may do a follow-up to this. So God bless. Good night.